Look at this. Absolute madness. Welcome everyone to the beating heart of Southeast Asia. This is Ho Chi Minh City. Or, if you've got a bit of soul and a sense of history, Saigon. Whoa there. 60 years ago, right here in these very streets, a man was walking. He wasn't a soldier, he wasn't a revolutionary. If you passed him on the pavement, you'd probably think he was an accountant, heading out to buy a baguette and complain about the humidity. But inside his briefcase, 3 million piastres. Cold, hard cash. Now that money, it didn't buy property, it didn't buy a factory, it bought something much more dangerous. It bought a betrayal. A few days later, the President of South Vietnam was dead in the back of an armoured van. And the Americans were pretending they'd never heard of the man who delivered the money. Today, we're going to find the exact places where a handful of men quietly decided the fate of a country. Over coffee, cigarettes, and probably a few gin and tonics. Welcome to the architecture of secrets. Look at this place. Every influencer in Asia comes here for the perfect matcha latte photo. It's called the Cafe Apartment. But in the early 1960s, this building had a very different clientele. Spies. And the brilliant thing about it is how unbelievably ordinary it looks. If you're running a covert operation, you don't build a giant headquarters with CIA written on the door. No. You rent a slightly shabby apartment above a tailor shop. You sit on one of those balconies, sweating through a short-sleeved shirt, pretending to read the newspaper, while actually watching everything. And from here, you can see the whole boulevard. Perfect for quietly organising a coup. No laser watches, no exploding pens, just cigarettes, folders, and a lot of extremely dangerous conversations. But the real question is, who was the man carrying that briefcase? The man in the middle was a CIA operative named Lucien Conein. And if you look at photos of him, he doesn't look like a spy at all. He looks like someone who runs a small insurance company in Marseille. But Conein had a very particular skill. He could talk to both sides. The Americans trusted him. The South Vietnamese generals trusted him. And that's a very dangerous position to occupy. Because when the generals started getting, let's say, restless about their president, Conein became the messenger. And one day, in 1963, he walked into military headquarters carrying $42,000. That was the briefcase. In today's money, that's hundreds of thousands of dollars.
How are you?
Xin chào, tôi khỏe các anh.
Thế à? YouTuber.
Oh, no.
We're getting new too.
Yeah? No, it's okay, brother. Okay, không có gì.
Không tiền à? Free or free?
No, it's okay. Come on. Anyway, that was the briefcase. In today's money, that's hundreds of thousands of dollars. But the money wasn't technically a bribe. Oh no. It was far more subtle than that. Conein simply made sure the generals understood something very important. If they removed the president, the United States would not object. It's the most powerful sentence in diplomacy. We won't stop you. Now, compare those cramped little apartments to this. This was the seat of power for the president of South Vietnam, Ngo Dinh Diem. Built in sleek 1960s modernist style, lots of sharp lines, lots of polished wood. It feels a bit like the headquarters of a Bond villain. The Americans actually loved Diem at first. They called him the Miracle Man. He was fiercely anti-communist, deeply Catholic, very disciplined. Look around. But power has a strange effect on people. It shrinks their world. And Diem's world had become very small indeed. Diem had a brother, Ngo Dinh Ngo. He relied heavily on his brother Ngo, who ran the secret police and had the general warmth of a tax auditor with a loaded pistol. Between the two of them, they managed to alienate the Buddhists, the students, the generals, and eventually the Americans. This is where things start to feel different. You don't build bunker rooms with backup radio areas because you feel confident. You build them because you're afraid. It was down here in rooms like this where Diem spent his final days, staring at maps, while the generals he trusted were quietly planning his removal. And remember, that briefcase of money had already changed hands somewhere in the city. This is where the story gets interesting. Because when the coup finally began, Diem didn't stay here. He escaped. Which is a shame, because somewhere down here is the tunnel the president used to flee the palace. And unfortunately for him, it didn't save him. There was a moment that changed the entire political situation. In 1963, this Buddhist monk sat down in the middle of a Saigon intersection and set himself on fire. He didn't scream, he didn't move. The photograph traveled around the world, and suddenly the Americans realized something. Their miracle man was becoming a public relations disaster. So the Americans faced a choice: protect their ally, or allow the generals to remove him. They chose that second option. In 1963, the generals made their move. The palace was surrounded. The army turned against its own president. Diem and his brother escaped through the tunnels beneath this building. Only to be captured hours later. They were killed in the back of an armoured personnel carrier. And just like that, the miracle man was gone. It's fascinating, isn't it? We're taught that history is shaped by great battles and dramatic speeches. But sometimes history changes because a man walks down a street carrying a briefcase. And the funny thing is, today you can go to that exact building and order a croissant. History's a strange beast. I'm going to find a cold beer before this humidity finishes me off. See you in the next one.